Have you ever wondered what it's like to live under the absolute rule of one person? Throughout history, emperors weren't just leaders. They were gods on earth. Their word was law. Their whims could start wars, and their personal feelings could decide the fate of millions. In this world of unchecked power, the emperor's authority extended over everything, including the truth itself. What he said was real. What he felt became justice. But what happened when this absolute power was challenged? Not on the battlefield, but in the most private and vulnerable space, the imperial bedroom. When a woman connected to an emperor, be it a wife, a consort, or a favored concubine, was accused of betrayal, the fallout was never simple. This wasn't just a matter of a broken heart. It was a direct assault on the emperor's honor, a stain on his masculinity, and a threat to the stability of his entire dynasty. The story we're exploring today is one such case. It's a tale of love, suspicion, and terrifying consequence. It delves into what happened when a woman dared, or was accused of daring, to cheat on the most powerful man in the world. And the punishment that followed was so shocking, so utterly brutal, that it sent ripples of fear through an era already accustomed to violence and cruelty. Why was this particular response so extreme? What did it reveal about the nature of power, control, and the deep-seated fears of those who sit on the throne? Let us journey back in time to uncover a story that proves the old saying, "Hell hath no fury like an emperor scorned." The emperor in our story is not just any ruler. He is Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty in China, one of the most powerful and long-reigning emperors in Chinese history, ruling for over 50 years, from 141 to 87 BC. Emperor Wu was a complex figure. He was a brilliant military strategist who vastly expanded the empire's borders. He was a patron of the arts and established Confucianism as the state philosophy. But he was also known for his paranoia, his deep belief in superstition and magic, and his swift, often merciless, temper. To cross Emperor Wu was to invite disaster, and the woman at the center of this storm was Empress Chunjiao. Their story didn't begin with suspicion. It began with a fairy tale-like promise. When Emperor Wu was just a young boy, not yet the emperor, he was visiting his aunt, who was Chunjiao's mother. Pointing to the young Chunjiao, his older cousin, he famously declared, "If I could marry I would build a golden house to shelter her." This romantic vow gave birth to a famous Chinese idiom, storing Jiao in a golden house, which means to dote on a beloved wife or mistress. True to his word, when he ascended the throne, he made Chunjiao his empress. For a time, their life was the envy of the court. Empress Chun was beautiful, intelligent, and from a powerful, influential family that had been instrumental in helping Emperor Wu secure the throne. He owed her, and her family, a great deal. The Golden House was a reality. She was showered with affection, gifts, and the highest honors. She was the empress, the mother of the nation, second only to the emperor himself. Their union seemed unbreakable, a symbol of loyalty and shared destiny. But beneath the surface of this perfect imperial marriage, cracks began to appear. The biggest problem was that Empress Chunjiao failed to produce a male heir. In a dynastic system, this was not just a personal disappointment. It was a political crisis. An emperor needed a son to secure his lineage and ensure a smooth succession. Without an heir from the empress, the stability of the entire empire was in question. The pressure on Chunjiao was immense, and as years passed with no son, her position grew increasingly precarious. Emperor Wu, while perhaps still fond of his first love, was also a pragmatic ruler. His attention began to wander, and soon it settled on a new woman. A beautiful and talented singer named Wei Zifu was everything. Chunjiao was not. She was from a humble background, a stark contrast to Chunjiao's aristocratic pedigree. She was gentle, unassuming, and most importantly, she was fertile. She quickly bore the emperor several children, including his first son Lu Ru. As Wei Zifu's star rose, Empress Chunjiao's world crumbled. The emperor's visits to a golden house became less frequent. The affection he once showered upon her was now directed at her rival. Chunjiao found herself isolated, her influence waning. She was still the empress in name, but she was no longer the empress of the emperor's heart. consumed by jealousy and desperation. She reportedly spent vast sums of money trying to win back her husband's favor and seeking medical treatments to conceive a child, all to no avail. It was in this state of despair that Empress Chunjia allegedly made her fatal mistake. Feeling powerless and abandoned, she turned to a path that was strictly forbidden: witchcraft. According to historical records, she was accused of employing sorceresses to perform rituals within the palace. These weren't simple spells for good luck. The accusations were far more sinister. She was charged with using witchcraft and sorcery to curse her rivals, namely Wei Zifu, and to try and magically rekindle the emperor's love. In the Han Dynasty, witchcraft was considered one of the most heinous crimes. It was seen as a dark, subversive force that could disrupt the cosmic order and directly threaten the emperor, the son of heaven. The accusation alone was a death sentence. When Emperor Wu learned of this, his reaction was explosive. Was it genuine fear of the supernatural? Or was it the perfect excuse to remove an empress who was no longer politically useful and had become a source of personal frustration? The answer is likely a mix of both. The emperor's paranoia and his belief in the occult were well documented. He saw the alleged sorcery not just as an act of a jealous wife, but as a direct challenge to his authority and a threat to his life and his new family. He immediately ordered a sweeping investigation, led by a notoriously ruthless official. This wasn't a trial to determine guilt or innocence. It was a witch hunt, designed to eradicate a perceived threat. The investigation quickly spiraled into a brutal purge. The consequences were horrific, and the official in charge unleashed a wave of terror within the palace walls. Anyone remotely connected to Empress Chunjiao's household was a suspect. Torture was used to extract confessions, and the accusations grew wider and wilder. People were forced to name others to save themselves, creating a domino effect of death and destruction. Historical accounts state that over 300 people were implicated in this witchcraft scandal. They weren't just arrested, they were executed, often in brutal public displays, meant to serve as a terrifying warning to others. The palace, once a place of luxury and power, became a scene of bloodshed and fear. And what of Empress Chunjiao herself? For an ordinary person, the punishment for witchcraft would have been a swift and gruesome execution. But she was not an ordinary person. She was the emperor's first love, the woman for whom he promised a golden house, and her powerful family, while diminished, still held some influence. Executing her outright could have caused significant political instability. So, Emperor Wu chose a punishment that many considered a fate worse than death. He officially deposed her, stripping her of the title of empress. She was then exiled to a remote, desolate palace known as the Longgate Palace. It was a prison of gilded silence. She was given a household of servants and all the material comforts she could need, but she was utterly alone. She was cut off from the court, from her family, and most painfully, from the emperor. She was a ghost, living in a cold, empty echo of the golden house he had once promised her. Legend says that Empress Chunjia spent the rest of her days in the Longgate Palace, writing sorrowful poems about her lost love and faded glory, hoping to once again capture the emperor's attention. One famous poem, though its authorship is debated, speaks of the rustling bamboo leaves sounding like his footsteps, only to be a cruel trick of the wind. She lived out her life in this lonely confinement, a forgotten empress, a living monument to the emperor's wrath. The story of Chunjiao is a chilling reminder of the precarious nature of power for women in the imperial court. Her crime wasn't really cheating in the modern sense. It was a failure to fulfill her political duty to produce an heir, and her desperate, forbidden attempt to reclaim her status. The accusation of witchcraft was the tool, but the root cause was her loss of favor and utility. Her punishment wasn't a simple act of a jealous husband. It was a calculated political move by an absolute ruler. It sent a clear message to everyone in the empire. No one, not even the empress, was above the emperor's will. Betrayal, whether real or... Ever wondered what Europe was like after the fall of Rome? It wasn't a peaceful transition, that's for sure. Think of it like a power vacuum, a chaotic free-for-all, where new players scrambled to grab a piece of the crumbling empire. This was the world of the 6th and 7th centuries, a time we often call the Dark Ages. And right in the heart of this turmoil, in the lands that would one day become France and Germany, a dynasty rose to power. They were called the Franks, and their kings, the Merovingians. Now, if you're imagining noble kings and chivalrous knights, you might want to adjust that picture. The Merovingians were less Camelot and more Game of Thrones. Their story is a gripping saga of raw ambition, brutal power plays, and shocking betrayals. This wasn't a dynasty where power was passed down peacefully with a crown and a scepter. Oh no. Power was taken, often with a sword and a trail of bodies. Family ties meant very little when a throne was on the line. Brothers turned against brothers, sons against fathers, and queens were just as ruthless as kings. They were known as the long-haired kings because their uncut hair was a symbol of their power and virility. Cutting a king's hair was the ultimate insult, a way of stripping him of his right to rule. So, who were these fascinating and fearsome rulers? Let's start with the big name, the founder of it all, Clovis. Clovis united the Frankish tribes around the end of the 5th century. He was a brilliant, but brutal, military leader. One famous story tells of a soldier who disrespected Clovis by smashing a beautiful vase that Clovis wanted. Clovis didn't forget. A year later, during a troop inspection, he found a flimsy pretext to criticize that same soldier's weapon, threw it on the ground, and as the soldier bent to pick it up, Clovis split his skull with an axe, saying, "Thus you did to the Vaza at Soissons." That's the kind of man we're dealing with. But Clovis was also a shrewd politician. His most significant move was converting to Catholic Christianity. This wasn't just a spiritual decision. It was a masterstroke of political strategy. It won him the support of the Gallo-Roman population and the powerful church, giving him a legitimacy that his pagan rivals lacked. But here's the problem with building an empire on conquest. What happens when the conqueror dies? According to Frankish tradition, the kingdom wasn't passed to a single heir. It was divided equally among all the king's sons. After Clovis died in 511, his vast kingdom was split into 4 parts for his 4 sons, and you can probably guess what happened next. This system of partible inheritance was a recipe for disaster. It turned brothers into rivals, each eyeing the other's territory, constantly plotting to reunite the kingdom under their own rule. The history of the next century is a dizzying cycle of civil war, assassination, and temporary reunification, only to be split apart again in the next generation. Let's dive into one of the most infamous feuds of this era, a rivalry so bitter it lasted for decades. It was a clash between 2 powerful queens, Brunhilde of Austrasia and Fredegund. This wasn't just a political disagreement. This was personal. It all started with a marriage. The king of Austrasia, Sigebert, married a Visigothic princess named Brunhilde. His half-brother, Chilperic, the king of Neustria, got jealous and decided he wanted a fancy royal wife too. So he married Brunhilde's sister, Galswintha. But Chilperic already had a mistress, a former servant named Fredegund, and he wasn't about to give her up. A few months into the marriage, Galswintha was found strung-led in her bed. And guess who Chilperic married shortly after? Fredegund. Brunhilde was enraged. Her sister had been murdered, and her rival was now queen. This sparked a war that would consume the Frankish kingdoms for nearly 40 years. Fredegund was the master of the shadows. She was ruthless, using assassins to eliminate her enemies. She sent killers after Brunhilde, her husband Sigebert, and even her own stepchildren to secure the throne for her son. She used poisoned daggers, hired thugs, and every dirty trick in the book. One of her assassins was supposedly caught with a special knife, grooved and coated with poison, designed to be lethal, even with a scratch. Brunhilde, on the other hand, was a different kind of player. She was a skilled ruler and administrator, acting as regent for her son and then her grandson. She was intelligent, educated, and tried to rule with a firm hand, strengthening royal authority and repairing old Roman roads. But she was just as determined to get her revenge. The war between them was a brutal affair of battles, betrayals, and murders. It was a personal vendetta that shaped the politics of an entire generation. The climax of the story is as brutal as its beginning. Fredegund eventually died of natural causes, a rare thing for a Merovingian ruler. But Brunhilde lived to a ripe old age. By then, she had outlived her children and grandchildren and was ruling as regent for her great-grandson. However, she had made many enemies among the Frankish nobles, who resented her power and her attempts to centralize control. They conspired against her, led by a man named Clothar II, the son of her nemesis, Fredegund. In 613, the nobles betrayed the elderly queen, who was now in her 70s, and handed her over to He wasn't about to show mercy to the woman who had fought his mother for decades. He accused her of the deaths of 10 Frankish kings, a while exaggeration, and subjected her to 3 days of torture. Then, in a final, horrific act of vengeance, he had her tied by her hair, one arm and one leg, to the tail of a wild horse, which was then spurred to gallop, tearing her apart. It was a gruesome end to a powerful and controversial life. With Brunhilde's death, Clotho II, Fredegund's son, finally reunited the entire Frankish kingdom under his rule. For a brief moment, the civil war stopped, but the underlying problems hadn't gone away. The system of dividing the kingdom, the powerful and rebellious nobles, and the culture of violence were still there. The Merovingian kings who followed Clotho found their power slowly slipping away. As the kings became weaker, another group became stronger. The mayors of the palace. Originally, the mayor of the palace was just the head of the royal household, like a chief of staff. But over time, they became the real power behind the throne. They controlled the royal treasury, commanded the armies, and made all the important decisions. The later Merovingian kings became known as the Fenians, or the Do-Nothing Kings. They still had the long hair and the title, but they had no real authority. They were paraded out for ceremonies, living a life of luxury on country estates. But the mayor of the palace was the one actually running the show. This shift in power wasn't sudden. It happened gradually over several generations. One family, in particular, came to dominate the office of mayor of the palace. You might recognize that name. A man named Pepin of Herstal became the mayor of the palace for the entire Frankish kingdom, effectively making him the ruler in all but name. His son, Charles Martel, which means Charles the Hammer, became even more famous. In 732, at the Battle of Tours, Charles Martel led the Frankish army to a decisive victory against a Muslim raiding force from Spain. This battle was hugely significant. It halted the northward advance of Islamic forces into Western Europe and cemented Charles Martel's reputation as the savior of Christendom. He was the most powerful man in the kingdom, but he was still technically just the mayor of the palace. The Merovingian king was still on the throne, doing nothing. The final act of this dynasty came with Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short. Pepin was tired of the charade. He had all the power, so why shouldn't he have the title? In 751, he did something incredibly bold. He sent a letter to the Pope in Rome and asked a simple, loaded question. Who should be king, the one who has the title, or the one who has the power? The Pope, needing a strong ally in Europe, gave the answer Pepin wanted. With the Pope's blessing, Pepin deposed the last Merovingian king, Childeric III. He had Childericus. Long hair cut off that symbolic act of stripping him of his power and sent him to live out his days in a monastery. Pepin the Short was then crowned king of the Franks, beginning a new dynasty, the Carolingians. The age of the Merovingians was over. Their nearly 300-year reign, which began with the conquests of Clovis and was defined by brutal civil wars, powerful queens, and scheming mayors, ended not with a bang, but with a haircut. The legacy of the Merovingians is complex. They were violent and self-destructive, and their system of inheritance guaranteed instability. But they also laid the foundations of the kingdom that would become France. They were the bridge between Rome and Gaul and the medieval world of Charlemagne, Pepin's son, who would go on to be crowned emperor. Their story is a raw and fascinating look at how power was won, held, and lost in a brutal age. It's a reminder that history is often messy, driven by very human emotions like greed, revenge, and the relentless desire for power. Thanks for watching this deep dive into the wild world of the Merovingian kings. If you found this story of betrayal and ambition as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the so-called Dark Ages. Let me know in the comments which Historica dynasty you'd like to see us cover next. See you in the next video.